Mhm.
Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author, Catherine Carrigan. You can find out more about me and my work at my websites, catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletters so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, today we're going to be talking about one of my personal favorite subjects. So I'm super excited to have Lisa Dailey here on the show. Now, Lisa Dailey is a horticultural consultant, master gardener, and you can find out more about Lisa Dailey and her amazing work on her website, cultivatewithintention.com. Welcome, Lisa Dailey.
Hi, great to be here.
So, for our audience, I want to say that, a lot of us love to garden. And if you've been to my website, catherinecarrigan.com, I love orchids, I love my garden. And one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that my garden is 100% organic. And of course, organic gardening is going to make a lot of sense to those of us who follow the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. But we want to talk with you today about how organic gardening can make your garden even more beautiful, but it's also critical for your personal health. And what a lot of people don't know, that as you garden organically and take care of the soil, that recent research shows that organic gardening and taking care of your soil is also going to be one of the solutions for global warming. So, as you pay attention to what Lisa Dailey is going to share with you today, you're going to help yourself, you're going to help your health, and you're going to help the planet. So, Lisa Dailey, I know that you spent decades helping people enjoy beautiful gardens organically. Why is wellness and a healthy, balanced ecosystem in our home and gardens so critical?
Well, thank you, Kathy. This piece is hypercritical because I feel that each one of us is responsible for our own tiny piece of land that surrounds our house, or it could be container gardening or whatever. But we are able to facilitate protecting our future. And I have this little quote that I generally like to start everything with because it brings our thought process to what I term as place with a capital P. And it is a quote from John O'Donohue, an Irish poet, from his book, The Invisible Embrace. And it goes like this: Is it not possible that a place could have a huge affection for those who dwell there? Perhaps your place loves having you there. It misses you when you are away, and in its secret way rejoices when you return. Could it be possible that a landscape might have a deep friendship with you? That it could sense your presence and feel the care you extend towards it? Perhaps your favorite place feels proud of you. End quote. And I use that quote to premise the idea of protecting our soil. So everything today that we're going to talk about, Kathy, is going to come back to the health of our soil over and over and over again. And we could get really sciencey if we want, or we can look at it from a health point of view, holistic point. There's so many ways of looking at it. But if we all learn to feed our soil and to enliven our soils, we will be better for it for every element of our life. And to your point, it is a small way to prevent or turn back this global warming effect that we have going on today.
Okay, now those of us who are avid gardeners understand that there's so many benefits that we get from gardening. So we get a lot of exercise. I mean, Sunday I was out there and I thought, I picked up 22 bags of Nature's Helper. I'm like, I literally can't pick up another bag. We get our exercise, we're getting fresh air and sunshine. And here at the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio, we've had numerous experts talk about how just 20 minutes outside in the trees is one of the best natural healing remedies for depression. So it's going to lift our mood. We're getting our exercise. Of course, we're creating tranquility for ourselves and our neighbors. But many of us do not think about the adverse consequences of gardening. And I'm in a little garden club here in Atlanta, and I cannot even tell you, I have lost count how many members of our garden club, which has about 30 members, have contracted cancer. And some of them have even died of cancer. And many people don't understand the common garden chemicals that cause health problems. So, Lisa Dailey, can you explain what are some of the common chemicals that people use in their gardens, thinking they're going to make things better, that are actually destroying their own health and the health of our ecosystems?
That's such a great way to start off, because as you know, up until I'd say the 40s, we didn't apply general amounts of chemicals on our yards. If you go back and look how your grandmother did it, there were more homeopathic or natural ways to take care of problems. And then after World War II, some of the chemicals that were developed in Germany, ironically enough, nitrogen production, nerve gases, those were then applied to the development of fertilizers and pesticides. So mentally, you can draw the connection of how dangerous these chemicals can be. But I want to backtrack 1 minute back to the soil, which we will do over and over again for the next hour. So understanding that the soil is alive, and in 1 teaspoon or tablespoon of soil, there'll be billions of different types of bacteria and mycorrhizal and worms. It's just teeming with life. And you might remember back in school the circle of life diagram, and how the plants feed the roots that feed the microorganisms that chop up and make soil and then release oxygen in the air for us to breathe. So this wonderful cycle that we, as unfortunately as humans, are disrupting it with the use of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. And so those are going to disrupt, and they are going to kill these microorganisms in the soil that have a insanely beautiful relationship, symbiotic relationship with all plant material. I want you to think about, let's use the Amazon as an example. Somehow, I don't believe that we're trucking in tons of fertilizer and pesticides into the Amazon. But yet it is this enclosed ecosystem that is working beautifully. And I use that analogy a lot because I want people to understand that nature has it going on. Nature knows what it's doing. And if we can emulate that in our own little place, then we can facilitate the restoration of our soils and then help the overall climate. As far as herbicides are concerned, the one you excuse me, hear about a lot is the glyphosate. I never can pronounce it.
Glyphosate. I'll help you out. It's glyphosate.
Yes.
Glyphosate.
Yeah, and Roundup, and we've heard a lot about it because of the suits against the manufacturer. However, so many things have happened just around that one herbicide. As an example, the production of GMO seeds that just work in coordination with this product. And then that leads to a whole nother conversation on lack of diversity in our food systems. And we could go on that, but I digress. The herbicides obviously get into the soil because they get into the roots. And but I want everyone to think about how you define a weed. And probably I've got two favorites. One of them is a weed is generally just a plant growing in the wrong place to your observations. I like that one. And then Ralph Waldo Emerson, you've probably heard this quote about a weed, and I quote, "A plant whose virtues have not yet been discovered." So it's just a question of opinion. And then following with that line of thinking, what is the homeowner, the gardener's tolerance of a weed? Is it green? Does it really bother you? Is it choking out things at work? Can you not pull it out or scoop it out? So that's my opinion on weed control. And I have other ideas for that as well. And then the pesticides came from the nerve gases. So pesticides come in and basically they work by being absorbed into the bodies of the insects, and then their nerve systems are affected. They die. They go back into the soil, and oh my goodness, those mycorrhizals or those bacteria that can tolerate it, they'll eat it, and then it goes through the entire system. So remember, we are in a closed system, and we need to respect that and honor it.
Now, here at the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio, I remember one of my favorite interviews. I interviewed the founder of Moms Across America, which is an organization that promotes organic food for children. And she told the story about a mother, a low-income mother whose child had such severe learning problems and behavioral problems that the school wanted to kick him out of school. But what they did was they simply put the child on an organic diet so that he didn't consume the glyphosate from Roundup. And the child's behavior problems completely changed, their learning problems completely changed. And this was a low-income mother who didn't, we think, oh, I've got to be wealthy to eat well. Well, you can save yourself a lot of money by eating properly and avoiding these chemicals in our garden. We've had another expert on glyphosate talk about how glyphosate destroys your own gut microbiome. And one of the things we know is that 70% of your immune system begins in your gut and can cause all kinds of neurotoxicity problems that affect your own brain and your mood, depression, anxiety. And again, there's that nasty word cancer, which we all want to avoid. And I'll never forget, one of my clients came to see me years ago, Lisa Dailey, and she was having these weird reactions and she couldn't figure it out. And I figured out that she'd been eating tomatoes out of the garden in her family farm. And unbeknownst to her, one of her cousins had gone in and sprayed Roundup in the garden. And she was having all kinds of health problems as a result of that. And probably my first experience of that was years ago. One of my first homes, I was trading out and I was tutoring someone in exchange for him taking care of our lawn. Well, without my permission, he poured all these chemicals on the lawn. And when I would go outside to work in my garden, I would just start shaking. And I didn't understand why. And fortunately for me, we actually moved out of that house because there had been so many chemicals poured on the grass that it was not healthy for me to go out in my own garden, where up to that point, I'd spent hours and hours every week. So what sort of chemicals get poured on our lawns that are really unhealthy for us?
Wow. There are so many. I mean, have you walked into a big box store and looked at that wall of chemicals that are specified for ant control or grubs or broadleaf weeds? It goes on and on and on. Um, the biggest one that I feel that we need to discuss is really the synthetic fertilizers that are being put down by the companies that come and spray and lawn maintenance type of companies. And I just feel that they are spraying and they're mixing the fertilizers with, say, pesticides, say, herbicides. And we aren't really quite sure. No one's ever educated me on the appropriateness of, one, how these chemicals, or let's use the word, how these ingredients interact with each other. And there's a carrier. And how do they react with the carrier? I.e., the solution that they're mixed in or the granule that they're impregnated on. So I am always aware of that idea. Particular, so lawns, I think, are the biggest culprit of contamination, particularly to our water. Like take Atlanta, for instance, it is hilly and you've got streams all through the city. And, how many lawns are treated that way? And then you have runoff, particularly because a lot of these products are not generally accepted into the soil and worked in, so they run right off. So that concerns me. I'm not being particularly specific because you can lump all of these into one, whether it's a synthetic fertilizer, and then of course your herbicides and your pesticides are all 99% synthetic, and that is not part of nature. So therefore we have a disconnect as we go back to the soil and all of those microorganisms that we need to feed and not kill.
Yes, and in many urban areas, the lawns and especially
Yes.
golf courses are some of the number one polluters in urban areas. Now,
Yes.
let's take this back to this global situation. And you had recommended to me a wonderful documentary that we can now recommend to our audience called Kiss the Ground, narrated by Woody Harrelson. And the premise of that documentary is that we as a global society can solve global warming by changing the way that we take care of our soil. And it all starts with us, the gardeners, and our own house. So Lisa Dailey, can you explain for our audience, how do all these toxic chemicals hurt the environment?
Well, it's really, really simple. I'm going to go back to the cycle of life. And again, it all stems to what's going on in the soil as it relates to growth of plant material. So many of these products are absorbed into the system via the plant roots. And as we just discussed, we have runoff issues. And then this water is then trickled down out to the ocean. So then we have problems out there too. So it's just these chemicals get into our circle and it starts to break it apart. And one of you mentioned a minute ago, all of the health issues that come from these chemicals getting in our food supply, or even just in our water particularly, which then of course gets into our food supply. So again, it's this never ending cycle. And I just feel that It's practices too, because if you remember, the first thing I always say is cover your soil, protect your soil. Because if we leave it exposed, then we're going to have huge, huge problems. I think they referenced in this documentary that we have approximately 60 years left of topsoil in the world. And if you go back to science and I don't know, grade school or middle school, and understanding how geology works and how rocks are broken down and how long it takes, so we need to get busy in protecting our individual places to prevent this from further happening, because it is a closed system. And we as humans are part of that system.
So let's take it back to our audience. So somebody would be listening to this and go, yeah, but I really want to have a beautiful garden.
Okay.
And, I if you go to catherinecarrigan.com, you'll see all the photos of my beautiful garden, which I love so much. And part of the reason I share these is this is what's possible with organic gardening. So Lisa Dailey, if you have a client or prospective client and they're wanting to have a beautiful garden, can you explain for that individual why it's even more possible for them to have a healthy, beautiful garden without all these toxic chemicals?
Absolutely, it is totally possible. Again, I always like to ask clients, what can you tolerate? Like weeds, like we talked about a minute ago. Um, but I know that the best way to bring your place back into a more viable, healthy environment to walk on, to garden in, to just sit out and enjoy is to go back into your soil and start adding good compost and humus products that you can buy or you can create, or build yourself, and that will begin the process. Now, I also want your viewers to understand that, let's go back to the rainforest. That is a very fabulous ecosystem that's totally enclosed. And the leaves that fall off are decomposed, the branches, the animals, everything goes into the soil. The soil is working so hard and it's supporting all this plant material. I mean, if you think about the plethora and diversity of plant material there, which is again something we should talk about, but it all goes into what's on your property, what's in your ecosystem, because quite honestly, that property was there long before we were, and that system was working very well. So those trees and those bushes and that material that's in place, so it is all, they're all working symbiotically. They all work together. So I always like to suggest, keep your leaves. Make a compost pile. Use your leaves and debris as mulch. And if you need it to look prettier, then put a small border of bark or pine straw so you have that aesthetic look. But however, keep your material and use it. It's very, very valuable. And then, of course, I know in Atlanta, my daughter-in-law participates in your composting opportunity, which I think is fabulous. And so if I'm not mistaken, then you're able to you're able to get compost because you participate in that recycling. So you should check that out or make your own compost. But that is the only way to do it. And then, of course, to use organic fertilizers if you must use a fertilizer. And then thirdly, introducing native plant material into your gardens, into your flower gardens, into your landscapes, material that is indigenous to your area. And that will further create this healthy symbiotic relationship that's happening underneath your ground. It's really, really simple. Oh, and note, it will take a couple of seasons.
Now, one of the things that we know as gardeners, there's really only three variables: the sun, how much light there is, the water, how much rain there is, and the soil. Now, I can't flip a switch on the sun. And if there's a drought, there have been droughts here in Atlanta, or times when there's just torrential rain. I can't control the sun or the rain. I can pay attention in my garden about which areas are get more sun. And so those of us who are gardeners, we're paying attention. How does the landscape change over time? Is it getting more sunlight? Is it getting less sunlight? But the one variable that we can control the most is the health of our soils. And so for myself, I'm always putting out cow manure and organic mushroom compost. So and then there's something called mill organite, which is organic processed sewage, believe it or not.
Right.
So Lisa Dailey, what are some organic soil amendments that people can add to their soils? And then you can put out, I put out ladybugs, which you can get ladybugs that are helpful, beneficial insects.
Correct.
So Lisa Dailey, horticultural consultant, master gardener, organic gardening expert, what are some things that we can do to improve the health of our soils that are going to make our gardens healthier, make us healthier, and help the planet?
Organic matter. Any form that you can find. Now, keep in mind that the bagged items that you get at, your hardware store, big box stores, because of law, they must be basically sterilized. So that's not alive. So that's why I always recommend mixing in material that is alive from your yard, i.e. your leaves, grass clippings, pruning clippings, shredded up or, whatever. But that's not to say that those don't help. But to your point, find the ones that are organic. There are so many different brands on the market. It just takes a little bit of research. I know they referenced, there's a company called Daddy Pete's that's all organic, Kellogg. Some of your big box stores will carry those, and just pay attention to where the material is coming from. It takes a minute just to read the label. But the more organic matter that you can apply to your place, the better. Now, there also are companies that sell mycorrhizal components. To your point, the ladybugs, earthworms, adding all of these type of things into your soil, that can be done as well. And back to your conversation on what you can and cannot control. One thing I have noticed in my mother's garden in the mountains, switching from inert or synthetic 10-10-10 to a true organic fertilizer, say, for example, in the raspberry patch. When we hit a drought, I still had viability. Earthworm, I just figured, I could either do horticulture or I could set up a stand that sells earthworms. I wasn't really quite sure at that time. But the point being is, and that only took 2 seasons to build that soil up. So again, it's simple. It's composting, compost matter, and using organic fertilizers in your place.
So Lisa Dailey, for our audience, when our audience goes to a garden center, how do they know what to look for?
That's a good question. And most garden centers to date are enlarging their organic sections. So that's where I would start and look in those sections. And if you have a particularly bad problem, like I know safer soaps and products like that you can use topically for aphids or what have you, but there are other ways we can handle insects. But when you are in the garden center, what I'm hoping you're actually doing is looking for organic compost matter, soil amendments that you can put into your soil to feed your soil. I think that should be our line, is we are going to feed the soil, which then in turn will feed the plants, which then in turn will protect our water and feed us in a more healthy fashion. Oh, and help us with the carbon issue.
For sure. And one of the things that we know is that if a toxic chemical is going to kill birds, bees, or hummingbirds, it's also going to be bad for you, right?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, because a huge byproduct of organic gardening, and it's so important, is we must feed our pollinators as well and protect our pollinators as well. Or, I don't know, the conversation is just sort of a waste of time, because we have to have the pollinators to spread this pollen around and create our fruits and our vegetables. And that's super important to remember. And that you will see an improvement. Gosh, in one season, more butterflies, more hummingbirds, more bees and wasps and flies of any type, but they're all pollinators. So
And
pollinating is important.
one of the things that we know is that one out of three, every 3 bites of food that you eat comes to you courtesy of a bee.
Yes.
And so by, again, having these organic gardens, even, my little garden, if you think of the whole earth, is just this small little place. But I think about how I'm protecting this little plot of land for my own health and the health of all the living organisms around it. Now, Lisa Dailey, you're an expert at this. What sort of practices can we use to have an organic garden? If a person's listening and they don't already have an organic garden, what can they do to switch over?
Right. Well, as we've said, it is putting as much organic compost material, humus back into your soil. That just feeds these critters that are living underneath us. That's number one. And you just do that all the time. And for us in the South, because of the heat, we really need to pay a lot of attention to that, because if you think about it, the heat will amplify the process, particularly in our summer. So that compost material that you put down in the spring will be eaten up pretty quickly. So it's something that you need to be aware of and doing all the time. That's number one. So we're feeding the soil. Number two, organic gardening works best when you plant the right plant at the right place at the right time. So therefore, the plant will do what it's designed to do, as God created it. And we hopefully don't have to participate that much in it. And which leads me to adding into your landscape, particularly your not so much your edible landscape, but your non-edible landscape, introducing more native material. And you can find that, on, University of Georgia website. There's so many places that you can find for your areas for that. And then thirdly, might have to fertilize. You can have a soil test and check that as well. But generally speaking, if you're feeding that soil, you really don't need a soil test, because you're emulating the nature in the area which your place exists. And that's what I always tell people. Look outside of that area. Look into the area that might not have been developed or damaged or just disturbed, and try to emulate that. And that will help with organic, because if you bring in native material, what else are you going to bring in? You're going to bring in the insects that are indigenous to your area, that have a safe haven, because you're not using any synthetic material. And but you might need to fertilize, because some of the vegetables, particularly in your edible garden, are heavy feeders, i.e. tomatoes particularly. Then use a good, strong organic fertilizer. And there are quite a few on the market that also come with mycorrhizal components, biologicals within that product. So that's what I would recommend.
Great advice. And our listeners are indeed actually all over the world, not only in the UK and the US, but in India and literally globally. So I encourage you, wherever you are, to do some research and find what native plants grow easily. And what you'll find is the native plants, you don't have to work very hard, they're
Right.
happy. One of the things I will say, I can attest that organic gardening saves me money. I'll tell a story because I amended the soil in my back garden, and I love my garden, so I've got different areas. Anyway, I amended the soil, and simply by amending the soil, all these plants that I never paid money for just appeared. I had black-eyed Susans in one part of my yard that migrated over there. I had foxgloves that I had bought years ago, but they literally reappeared in the soil once I amended it, and different daisy varieties. So you're going to be amazed by doing some of these organic practices. It's going to save you money in the long run. Now, Lisa Dailey, and this is really important because here we are at the Natural Healing Show. Why is organic gardening better for your health?
We could have done a whole show just on that. So I think if you look at where we are, and not just this year, just pretty much any time, we spend far too much time, I guess technically involved would be a word to use, whether we're on our phones, computers, we're always available. We don't run home and check the answering machine anymore because we're always available. And I think that leads to a certain amount of underlying stress. And if you walk out, and I know it's been documented over and over again, into a garden, any garden, you are going to have this just lovely release. Have you ever, and any of you, walked into the forest and smelled the scents of the forest? And it is actually the soil that's releasing, what is the term? I have it written down. Hold on. It's a naturally occurring bacteria, and it's Mycobacterium vaccae, and it releases serotonin.
Yes.
And that's what happens when we get out and you get into the dirt, and that has totally been proven. And I just love that. And when you walk into the forest and you smell the dirt, the soil, it's working. And so organic gardening brings more of that to the forefront for each of us as we walk outside. Gardening, whether it's organic or not, to your point, how many bags did you lift the other day?
22 bags, and they've been waterlogged. And so they were just so heavy.
So who needs weights?
Exactly.
They're exercising, you're lifting, you're shoveling, you're bending, you are getting a good cardiac exercise when gardening. One of the things for me in gardening is, because I am a creative person, I get a lot of ideas when I step away and I walk outside into the garden. And it may not be about gardening, it may be about something totally else going on in my life, but it allows that break that you can think. That's kind of why I like yoga in the garden too. Gosh, accomplishments, getting something. I know. How did you feel when you finished planting your garden?
I felt like I had won the lottery. It was so beautiful. Now,
Yeah.
Lisa Dailey, many people who are listening will think, well, the person who owned the house before me, or maybe it was me, I didn't know better. A lot of us, I always say to my clients, when you know better, you do better. But if a previous owner of your yard has used chemicals, toxic chemicals, what can you do?
The same thing that we talked about before is stop bringing anything synthetic onto your place. Start adding material, leaves, branches, start a compost pile from material that is already in your yard and have that break down and put that back as if nature was doing it anyway. Because I always laugh and I see all these bags of leaves being ready to be picked up and taken somewhere. Hopefully they are putting them into compost, but nevertheless, those should be recycled back into your individual places. Again, this will take a season or two to get all of the material back out of your system, so to speak. But again, the more you feed your soil with compost, and then, use your eggshells, use your coffee grinds, use all of the old-timey ways of composting and just throw that into that. And it is another step, but it is really worth it. And that is the best way to bring your soil back to full life. And it's just adding, and then not using anything synthetic on your place.
Now, I've got a good story for our audience because years ago, I remember getting my water bill for the month of August. And at the time, I had a lawn with grass. And my water bill for the month of August was $750. And I
Wow.
was like, oh my goodness, I cannot keep doing this. And one of the things we know, you put pesticides, herbicides, all the things that go onto the lawn that people do to try and make their lawn look green. Some of the most unhealthy lawns are the ones that are really super green without any weeds in it. Anyway, what I did was I tore out all the grass. And I can remember going out with my pickaxe. I definitely hired somebody to help me. It was incredibly hard work. But I xeriscaped my yard where the grass had been. And over time, I put in native plants and little different garden areas. So one of the things that I did to begin to revert my garden to all organic was I tore out the grass. And xeriscaping was putting in drought resistant perennials. And so that evolved over time. Now, Lisa Dailey, as you know, as an organic gardening expert, many people use companion plants to help promote the health of their garden. What is companion planting and why is it so important?
Oh, companion planting is so fun. Companion planting is the idea of using different plants, different plant families that work symbiotically together. For example, we probably remember stories from the Native Americans about how they planted. And they used the philosophy of the three sisters.
Mm.
And they would plant corn, beans, and squash
Mm.
all together. And it was also a form of succession planting as well. So the corn grows tall. It provides a stake for the vine of the beans to crawl up and then shades the squash plant. And that all works symbiotically together. And so I always love going back to that because that's historical. Another one, for instance, you probably heard that. So marigolds, because of their scent and whatever else is going on with marigolds, that's truly their scent. They are a huge deterrent for aphids and beetles and different chomping bugs that get into our vegetable gardens. Could it be just on tomatoes or not? So always planting flowers in your garden to deter insects, which also brings us back to that whole philosophy. Oh, that's another way to garden organically, is to use companion planting, because different plants help deter bugs. Also, beans, for an example, are legumes. I always have them in the garden because they by the way they are, bring nitrogen into the soil. So now I'm building nitrogen in the soil, and I use those as cover crops to add nutrients into the soil organically for the next growing season. So that's another type of companion planting. Calendulas and cosmos work beautifully in gardens. You can put herbs. Herbs are hugely important as companion plants, like parsley and basil intertwined with peppers and tomatoes. They work very well together. I love the Farmer's Almanac. And you can go to their website and they have a fabulous list of companion plants that are particularly for vegetable gardening. But to step it out another step, the type of companion garden on a big scale that I'm excited about, to circle back to the movie that you referenced, Kiss the Ground, that farmers are beginning to understand the value of different types of companion planting, even in their money crops. And that solves, it reduces the use of herbicides, it reduces the use of inorganic fertilizers, and these cover crops are going to feed the soil. So it's a total win-win. I guess that pretty much sums it up, because depending on where you are. Oh, and the other thing about that I love about companion planting is I like to always have my soil covered. And whether I'm going to mulch it or I'm going to companion plant it. And I have found, as an example, in my garden in the mountains, I've started planting lady peas as a legume, and I just cram it in between the rows of, say, or the outside of the squash, and let them run up the fence. But the point is that I, instead of having mulched or clean rows, I've got herbs in those rows. I've got arugula growing. I've got lettuce growing, because companion planting, so I've got material that's going to shade my lettuce come the end of July, and I still want to have lettuce. So there's so many valuable uses to companion planting. Plus, so you've got size, you've got shading, you've got nutrient additions to the soil, and you have pest control. Win-win.
Win-win. You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today has been the wonderful Lisa Dailey, horticultural consultant, organic gardening expert, master gardener. You can find out more about Lisa Dailey and her wonderful work at her website, cultivatewithintention.com. And remember that when you engage in organic gardening, you're reducing stress, you're promoting your positive neurotransmitters that make you happy, you are detoxing your lifestyle, and you're actually healing the planet by taking care of your soil. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.